Thank you very much, by the way, other teams, for coming in and seeing us. It's nice to see a few friendly faces. We are from the University of Sydney, and this is our consulting group. My name is Lawrence Bowdett, and these are my colleagues Alan Zhu, Samuel Lewis, and Andrew Peters in the corner. And in stereotypically direct Australian fashion, what we'd like to do is get straight to the point, and that is that upon reading the case, we do believe that the fundamental issue is cost. We read through the case, and there's a lot of things about growth, there's about things about capturing market share in the short to medium term. Unfortunately, and again, to be slightly blunt, we don't believe that this is a reality of companies, of the incumbent companies, operating in these rechargeable electronic batteries for cars. We think that in the short to medium term, the focus is on cost and on positioning yourself, or rather positioning these businesses to capture the growth, which we believe will occur rather more in the long term. So the way we'd like to structure this presentation, and what we like to do, is to make sure that we give you a strategy which is grounded in reality. We know that a lot of consultants can come out there and lots of bells and whistles talk about very fancy implementation, but if it's not grounded in the facts, then frankly it's not useful at all. So what we'd like to do is spend 2 to 3 minutes talking about the context which has framed our strategy. And we've taken a top-down approach, as you can see, macro, industry, business. So starting with the macroeconomic environment, there's a couple of things which are key in terms of analysing the operating environment of these rechargeable battery manufacturing companies. The first of these is the fact that despite what the case says, that oil prices are high, they're actually not. They're actually at global lows. Brent was trading at roughly 55 the other day. It collapsed to as low as 44. WTI, West Texas, that is just as low. Which means that, well, the effect is twofold. Firstly, electronic cars are more expensive, and that's because the cost of producing these batteries is high. So we already have a problem in the sense that the sales growth has been low because of the cost, right? And on a social level, or rather on an environmental level, the simple fact of the matter is that despite the fact that everyone is environmentally conscious, we're not so environmentally conscious that that's going to outweigh the fact that we're also price conscious. No one wants to spend $50,000 for a Prius when you can get an equally good car for $20,000 and get from A to B as well. What's important though is that because of the new price of oil, it means that not only is the cost of buying a new rechargeable, or rather energy efficient car, lower, it's also the fact that if you have currently a traditional car, the cost of operation is lower. So there's neither an incentive to buy a new car, nor if you're running one to move into a new market because oil is more expensive. So that's really important on the macroeconomic environment. Moving down to the industry level, again, cost is key, right? We know that the production, or the capex required to produce these batteries is enormous. To produce one plant to generate, to invest R&D and build new batteries costs $5 billion. And what's more, we, as Alan will discuss in further detail, the raw materials that you source, these are your rare earth materials. The price of these is very high, and it costs a lot, simply put, to be able to produce batteries. And as a result, in the short to medium term, it is simply not feasible to break even. And that's something that these businesses, or what we would like to point out, is simply a reality. You can't break even in the short to medium term. So it's about whichever business it is we're advising of the incumbents, positioning ourselves to be a market leader. So going down to the business level, what we can see is that rather, since we're not advising a specific company, what we have is prospective values, prospective strategic aims. What a company would want to do, and what our strategic advice will seek to fulfill, is the fact that what you want to be able to do is manufacture efficient, cost-effective, and quality electric vehicle batteries. That's the aim, and as I said at the beginning, the operating environment is simply not conducive to being able to do that at the present time. So what our strategic aims are predicated upon is the fact that we want to position ourselves in the short to medium term to be able to capture the growth going forward. As such, if we move to the next slide, what we present to you is a three-pronged strategy, as they often are in these situations. And these levels, I suppose, build upon one another. Stages 1 and 2, backwards integration and R&D further efficiencies. What this means is that we're focusing on cost in the short to medium term and positioning ourselves to be able to capture the growth, which we envision will happen at a later date. Backwards integration. As I mentioned, and as Alan will speak to in further detail when he goes through his section, Vertical integration across the supply chain optimization, extremely important. One of the best ways that we can cut costs, or rather that these businesses can cut costs, is by backward integrating along the supply chain with rare earth materials producers, and Alan will speak to that. The second stage compounds that, and it's the fact that in the medium term, we still don't believe that the growth will be there. The demand is simply not high enough to satisfy all of these production capacities that we have. Utilization is not the issue. It's about cutting costs further. So investing more heavily in R&D to drive the efficiencies from this backwards integration, and similarly starting to look at increasing scope and scale so that these businesses are in the best possible position to capture growth at the very top. Alan will be speaking about the first point, Samuel the second, and Andrew the last. And I'll now pass over to Alan to discuss our first prong.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. So I'm here to discuss the first horizon of our strategy, which is to do with the short-term approach, which is really focused on cost efficiency. Now, cost efficiency, why do we see that as an issue? Because the demand for electric vehicles is there, but we see that there is not enough demand for us to pursue economies of scale and to focus on mass production. So cost efficiency is the way forward in the short term. And in understanding how we would become cost efficient, we understood that within our supply chain there were various factors that played to the cost aspect of our supply. And this breakdown was primarily understood through our raw materials. And what were our raw materials? Well, for an electric vehicle's battery, this was made of lithium, graphite, and of the rare earth materials. And through our understanding, the rare earth materials were the key driver of expense. Now, for you science buffs out there, what are these rare earth materials that we're referring to? Well, they're the lactanides and the actinides of the bottom of the periodic table. And we see that currently 90% of these rare earth materials are sourced from China, with the rest in other countries such as Australia and the US. So in order to capture the cost efficiency from this, we suggest a push towards acquiring preferred access to these raw materials. And because our presentation is grounded on facts, and we have not been provided with sufficient numbers to give you a recommendation of in order how to acquire or to merge, we can't provide you with figures with that. However, from what we've been given, we understand that these incumbent companies are in a great position to do this, with their net debt to EBITDA being 1 to 3 times. So these companies have the purchasing power to be able to acquire what we see as the key forward is preferential access to rare earth materials. Now I'd like to pass it on to Andrew to talk about, or Sam, let's talk about the second one.
Thank you very much, Alan. So, how is the company now going to take advantage of this access to the raw materials? You're possibly wondering. Well, something else that we've come from analysis, again, it's all factors-based, is costs not only come from the sourcing of raw materials, but their utilisation. So it is the technology that one has of the raw materials. And what's evidence of this? Well, it would be the fact that Nissan is now looking at sourcing outside its very own JV from LG Chemicals. What do LG Chemicals have? They have expertise in raw material technologies. So we're going to get them. We would highly advise a company that wants to do well and expand profitability and scale to be looking at either organically growing its own R&D in this area or acquiring someone. Now, is this something that's genuinely being done? Again, the facts of the case point to it being the case. Yes, Panasonic did it, and they did it with Sanyo. So what are the options out there? Well, we need to find them, and we need to act upon them. But after that, after we've got these raw materials, we want to keep on leveraging. This is what it's all about, it's making a better, bigger, more efficient company. So what's something else? Well, it's looking at where we can actually get scale for the future period that Andrew is going to discuss. It's about saying that if we're going to have these expertise, these lower costs, then we're going to need to be selling more of these batteries at some point, whether it's next year, 2020, 2025. But we don't want to have to go to the expense, that massive $5 billion expense of buying a new plant and setting it up. No, what we want to be looking towards is perhaps a plant that is already being established, but doesn't have the volumes going through it that perhaps its joint venture partners thought would make it cost effective. What can we look for that? Well, we can look towards AESC, which is the joint venture, obviously, between Nissan and their tech partner, NEC. So if we're able to negotiate, whether it's an acquisition or purely a production agreement, we can use this scale to leverage. And yes, we're talking about, obviously, this is the future that these companies are really going to be benefiting from. But before that, are there any other opportunities that these companies can move into? The answer is yes. We see the social desire of, particularly within developed nations, of generating one's electricity from the top of your house. So solar, we see huge investments within China for doing the same thing. Now, one of the main problems with photovoltaic energy is it's really only there when it's being generated, when the sun's out, when the sun is shining. So if you've got the energy coming in and you can't use it all, which you can't, what do you do with it? Well, you've got to put it somewhere. Put it in batteries. Now, we see that within both Europe, there is the expanse of German company Deutsche Gas, and within the United States, to much fanfare, Tesla unveiled how exactly their gigabyte plant is going to be generating revenue, not just from the sales of their vehicles, but the sales of these home and small business storage units. Now, it's very convenient that the owner of Tesla, more or less, also is the head of a Solar City, which is a major US company which goes about putting solar panels on people's houses, and guess what? Those people want to be storing the power. So it's looking at again, leveraging. It's looking at the fact that people want cheaper batteries, that the fact that governments may well decide to increase the amount of power which is generated through solar. It's about the fact that legislation currently, at least within our own country of Australia and some other countries, isn't yet there focusing on having good green growth, but that it could be. And so again, we're positioning ourselves. We're positioning ourselves with this scale and with this scope. Now, how to exactly capture that? That's Andrew.
Thanks, Sam. So we've now reached the final growth stage of our three-pronged strategy. Now, we believe that by this stage, the EV incumbent will become the most cost-effective, safe, and high-quality battery in the market. As such, the company must capitalise on this position as the wave of growth for consumers finally hits the shoreline. Now, how do they exactly do this? Put simply, they must target the key growth segments of China and Europe. Now, this is justified in the reality of the operating environment of these incumbents and was provided to us in the case brief, as demand is growing most strongly in these two markets for both the PHEV and the BEV vehicles, which is what the batteries of these incumbents are catering for. Now, to quantify these forecasts, 9.5 million EV vehicles will be produced by 2020. Now, based on what the analysis that we conducted and Lawrence spoke about earlier, we found that this proved to be quite bullish. And so we've revised this estimate to hit 2025, a far more accurate reflection of the demand and the capabilities of firms to meet these estimates. With this in mind, these produces a market of roughly 2.5 million vehicles in both China and Europe alone. Now, this is a huge market that must not be left untapped. So what should the incumbent company do to tap this market? Well, we believe it's going to be a function of negotiating with existing automobile manufacturers, because by this stage, the company has become the best EV battery on the market. And in doing so, it offers the greatest value proposition in comparison to any other competitor. Now, ensuring that we have locked in any exclusivity contracts or negotiations with these companies, customers who purchase these EV cars can feel safe and rely on the fact that they are being powered by the best EV battery in the market. And now, of course, we know that a strategy is nothing without having an accurate implementation. So I'd like to run you through a reiteration of our three-pronged strategy over our three timeline horizons. So as you can see on our horizon graph here and what Alan spoke about, the first key issue that we targeted is the supply chain. And how we dealt with that was establishing a strategic partnership with a raw materials company. We want to obtain preferred access that will give us the ability to reduce the cost, as we see this as a particularly important factor for the company in the short term. We've placed an estimate on that in 2016, so a 1 to 2 year time frame from now. The second stage of our strategy is greater efficiencies from the cost side. We seek R&D to optimize the electric vehicle batteries, and we've considered non-organic growth options such as M&A to further increase the scale and scope of this company's operations. We've placed a more prudent number of that by 2020, which is over the next 3 to 5 years. Now finally, by incorporating these two first prongs, we believe that come 2025, a far more realistic estimate based on the contextual analysis that we performed, we will be in a superior position in the market. And what should we do at that stage? We need to target the growth markets. And as I spoke about, they are in China and Europe. Of course, inherent in any business strategy are going to be a few key risks and mitigations. And I'll now pass over to Lawrence to cover those and wrap up our solution.
Yeah, exactly. So we wanted to give you a strategy grounded in reality, right? And what we've done is queried a few of the assumptions in the case based on the fact that it is all data, and we think, just based on what we see in the world and on the news, that some of it might be a little bit wrong. So with that in mind, there are obviously risks and corresponding mitigants associated with each of the prongs of our strategy. With respect to the supply chain, so that's the initial cost out, and that's the fact that we want to backward integrate across the vertical supply chain. The largest risk is obviously going to be not finding a suitable partner. We know that 90% of the market is monopolized by China, which means that, and a corollary of that is the fact that there are a handful only of actual players, outside of China. One of them is Linus, an Australian company, and there are several other US equivalents. As I said, a strategy grounded in reality. We're not going to give you a number in terms of how much it should cost to buy those companies. I can tell you that the market cap of Linus is roughly 200 million, but taking into account acquisition premiums and all of that, what we wanted to focus on rather is what the aim of that should be, and that is the fact that you want to get preferential treatment. So if we can't find a suitable partner, that's a problem. But we do have first movers advantage. No one else is doing that, and also by not approaching the Chinese, we have a genuine value proposition that we can offer these companies, and given they are trying to compete with within what is a monopolized industry, we think that there's a very good opportunity, if not by a complete acquisition, at least to establish a JV in order to secure preferential access to those rare earth materials going forward. Another risk associated with the next step of our strategy, and that is increasing the scope and scale, is potentially the fact that if this business was to acquire AESC, you would have to pay a significant premium. But that's M&A, right? You can't avoid that. And the simple fact of the matter is that Nissan doesn't want this JV right now. They want to focus on HEV, which is those hybrid vehicles, rather than the batteries and the rechargeable power stations, which is what we're dealing with. We think it's opportunistic, and we think that with a premium of 30 to 40%, unfortunately what Sam neglected to mention is that we did value that business based on the $9 million of net income that it generates each year, which we took as a rough proxy for free cash flows. The business is worth roughly $350 to $400 million US when we account for 30 to 40% acquisition premium. And as we said, there is scope across all of these incumbents to be able to pay that amount of money, because what's important is that we acknowledge that these businesses are not going to make money over the short term. It's about positioning ourselves in the long term to capture growth. What if the growth doesn't come? That's the big risk. There's an influx of new technology, nanotechnology. There's a large amount of things which could potentially happen to make, electronic batteries, or rather rechargeable cars, somewhat redundant. That's speculation. It's 10 years ahead. We're not going to pretend to know what the technology is going to do. What we do know, though, is that there is demand for these cars, that they are established, and that we can at the very least position ourselves as leaders in the market to capture that growth. So if we just get rid of that slide, and just to sum up, we're not advising a specific company, but if we were to advise your Panasonic or your Samsung going forward, what we would simply say is that what you want to do is vertically integrate. You want to save money in the short to medium term. The first way that we can do that is by vertically integrating down the supply chain. Sounding out the raw material suppliers, Linus, one of the American equivalents is the first option. Chat to the board, tee up lunch, do whatever you have to do to see if we can establish a JV. Probably before that, you might want to chat to an investment bank. I believe HSBC has some expertise in that area. Now I'd like to open to questions. So it's absolutely definitely an area that we considered, and as you know, not something that we spoke about specifically, because what we think that those represent is simply the fact that this is a relatively new product. It's a market in its infancy, and as with any new product that's being rolled out, there's going to be quality issues. And what we would like to point out is simply the fact that there is a significant amount of R&D expenditure across all of these businesses going into countering exactly that. We don't think that what is necessarily something that we needed to target in our strategy was alleviating any concerns with the fact that the battery might run out over a certain distance, or the fact that, or anything associated with that. At the end of the day, those kinks get ironed out over time. And the thing is that this is a new industry, and we do believe that given the existing R&D development into that space, those will be sufficiently covered going forward.
From my perspective, I think the focus on cost is a good strategy, right, in the shorter term. And I think you outlined some of the key solutions well. What I am looking for, and I couldn't get actually, is, and I'd like to get your views, is that what's the average unit cost today? And you mentioned, like, in the shorter term, in by 2016, you would like to focus first on reducing the cost. How much specifically percentage do you expect to reduce that average unit cost today? Do you have a view on that?
Yep, absolutely. So current industry forecasts suggest that the cost of running one of these batteries is about $1,000 per kilowatt hour, and the forecasts are that by 2020 that will reduce to 350 kilowatt hours. Unfortunately, not enough color in the case in order to indicate what exactly the composition of that is. But by analyzing the supply chain, what we did notice is that based on the supply chain of the existing engines which are being created versus the ones under an electronic battery model, the only real difference is in the cost of, in the raw materials being acquired. So assuming that that cost reduction is being driven in efficiencies on the raw materials front and technological know-how, what we believe, or what these businesses can do in order to best position themselves is to be market movers and be, capture that first mover's advantage in that space. Because if one of these businesses is able to vertically integrate and purchase these rare earth materials cheaper than anyone else on an exclusive agreement with one of the few suppliers worldwide, then that's extremely material in terms of the company's bottom line.
So you believe that the short-term strategy that you set out here will give you an extra pace over and about the market expected, reduction? So, because you mentioned like by third, almost, you're going to go by cost by, in, I don't know,
So
five years, right?
So
but you're suggesting that you're going to do it much shorter term. Are you going to hit 350 in 16, or
that
you're going to gradually reach
so
out to that market expectation?
What we have continuously seen is that there are ambitious projections of what something will be in the future, and it's never managed to live up to it. So what we see is by ensuring that we've got access to those raw materials, that we are making the investment in the relevant R&D of the raw material technologies, and having the scale and the scope for our position, that we will definitely be at that 350 per kilowatt hour, which is projected for 2020, if not better. And either way, we're going to be doing it ahead of our competitors.
And just to add on to that, there was a dichotomy in the analyst expectations that was provided in the brief. We had varying financial forecasts from 12%, which is very bullish, down to lower end of 6%. So there is an inherent dichotomy in this market as to what it is expected to grow for. But what our strategy tried to implement was the fact that by being this first mover advantage and actually acquiring a raw earth materials and focusing on your cost side, you will be able to achieve that $1,000 to $350 per kilowatt hour forecast, whether that's in relation to the market by 2020 or in a much suitable manner to reach our growth strategy by 2025 and hit those target markets.
Well, I concur your view about the uncertainty of the demand, right, of this EV. Because that's why we see it as an emerging market. And supposedly you have to advise the incumbent, the strategy for near term and mid-term and long term. What I haven't heard is how could you actually attract automobile companies, to partner with you so that you gain this so-called first mover advantage? Because I haven't heard, your analysis on who are the customer now. Okay, I know that not everyone will buy an EV today, but who are our customers now, and who are our partners now, and how could I actually position myself today in this emerging market to attract all the big guys to work with me instead of the others?
So there's a couple of things going on there. Firstly, the first mover's advantage is with respect to our cost base as a battery manufacturer. We want first mover's advantage in being able to lower our production cost so that what we can do, or so what these businesses can do, is sell these batteries at the lowest price possible. So, and the thing is, the reason why we want to do that is because the business, or rather the industry, is not going to exist in 10 years as it does today. So at the moment, what you're alluding to is the fact that, well, the customers rather of these businesses are traditionally in JVs. They're not quite exclusive agreements, but they're borderline exclusive arrangements, such that, for instance, Nissan will source all of its batteries for its line of energy efficient cars from one manufacturer. What we're saying is that, given there is simply no demand, and our customers being these car manufacturers, what would be in the best interests of the incumbents would be to not tie ourselves into a contract or an exclusive agreement with one of these players, because the market doesn't exist right now. And the thing is, you're just going to loss lead if you try and hit 10,000 units, 20,000 units. The cars aren't going to be sold, and you're just not going to make money. The way forward for these businesses is to focus internally on their businesses, to focus on backwards integration, to be able to produce these batteries for the lowest price possible, so that when the market actually picks up, we are able to produce, or these businesses, whichever one it is we're advising, is able to produce the highest quality and lowest price battery, which means that everyone is the potential customer. What would ideally happen is that you have a bidding war, and that we're not locked into a contract with just say Nissan or just say Tesla. What would be ideal is that if we're the market movers, if we are the premier creators or manufacturers of these batteries, then everyone would be aiming to buy from us.
What if the market suddenly skyrocket tomorrow? How would you deal with this capacity management issue?
Well, the plants are currently underutilized. They're at about 70%, so there's about 30% room to move. The thing I would say there is simply that, while I take your point, I disagree with the premise. It's very unlikely that the prices will skyrocket in the short term, because I have a car and I'm not going to suddenly go out and buy a hybrid car, and by the same token, I don't think anyone else will. It's fair enough to hypothesize about scenarios like that, but I think what's more realistic is the fact that there is a narrow range in which you'll potentially move. The number of units sold, the Bear and Bull cases that we have, the Bear, JP Morgan, 2.9 million units sold by 2020, 6.5 on the lower case. We don't think that'll happen by 2020, but if we just shift those numbers back by 5 years, we think that's a more reasonable estimate. So if that happens, then there's a little bit of capacity to deal with it, but realistically speaking, it's just not something that's likely.
So you mentioned the new risks and mitigations on the third one about the targeted growth, that potentially growth doesn't come. in the expected time range, right? So you make investment, you do R&D, you invest to create cheaper quality, batteries. What's your, how many years would you be able to sustain that investment? Did you make any sort of plans in your mind that, a period of time that the growth doesn't come and then you basically slow the pace of the investment?
Well, we did. The growth, according to the case, is forecasted to occur over the next 5 years. We think it'll occur over 10. In terms of how long you would stay there, well, the thing to remember is that each of these companies are not standalone companies. They're divisions within some of the largest multinational businesses worldwide. And I think in terms of, given the operating income generated by each of these divisions is below 10%, very minor divisions in the scheme of things of these businesses, I think there's capacity to run, to lose a little bit of money in the long term, because the thing is, what we do believe, we're not saying that there's no growth coming, we just think that it's coming at a future date. And we do believe, as we said, that there is financial capacity. These businesses have the firepower to be able to survive, invest heavily in R&D, and assume that it will occur in the 5 to 10 year horizon going from 0 to 5.
Briefly adding on to that point is the fact that we've got competitors there that are currently more or less at our level. So if we are able to get down the costs and increase the quality, which goes to the range anxiety, and then be going to the majors, Toyota, your Volkswagen Group, basically everybody, then our competitors aren't doing that, because we've gone and got that exclusive supply agreement, and we've made that investment where it's necessary. So even if there is a delay and we're being pressured, it's our competitors that may be pressured partners.
And furthermore, just to touch on the point that you raised up, if the demand doesn't come or if it slows down, that is something that Sam spoke about in terms of exploring alternative investment areas for these electric batteries. So we spoke about the example of Tesla, they're being used in the home, in solar cells. So there is definitely both financial leverage and also opportunistic markets if the demand does shift from forecasts.
Do we see a
Can we ask you a question?
Question for the judges.
How was your day?
You own an electric
Well, one part is I have personally visited the Tesla showroom, right? And I guess people who really goes to buy this kind of thing is not that cost conscious, right? They are the ones that who want this as a status symbol, because they are the ones who get it before others get it, right? And currently in Hong Kong, when you order a Tesla, the fastest turnaround time will be around 3 to 4 months, right? And that somehow actually affect many consumer purchase decision, right? Because it's some of them impulse buying, and also they want it now, right? And that's why I come up with these questions about the capacity management is also very important as advice to these incumbents.
Well, I think you could probably see that is part of the motivation behind Tesla's move into the home battery market. That it realises it's having production issues. The earnings, the share price of Tesla compared to the amount of cars it's actually producing, we know there's a big gap. So in terms of saying Tesla's very expensive, yes, with the Model S, and it's got 80,000 US. There is a focus for them to bring in a reduced cost car close to the 40-50 market. An example would be BYD, which is able to get those efficiencies down within China and be producing cars that are efficient. So looking at Tesla, everyone says Tesla because it's great and it stands out, but you've got to realise that all of the big cars are getting into it. The Volkswagen, the Audi, the Mercedes, BMW, Toyota, GM, Ford, and so there is the business space out there in the scope that you need.
Just to add to that, you mentioned that the people buying these cars are not price conscious. Again, unfortunately, I would argue that might not be a correct assumption, given the really the only environmental, I guess, car that's actually taken off is the Prius. I'm not sure whether people are buying that as a status symbol. I may be wrong, but I feel like if you had the money to buy a sports car, if you had, if you're buying a car that's roughly $50,000, you're still in that bracket where you might be slightly price conscious, and you're not buying it because of just a whim. You're buying it because you actually want that car specifically. But perhaps we can just disagree there.
Just one final comment on the overall demand side. Personally, from my perspective, if I see myself as a consumer, one of the areas that I'm thinking, rather than the cost, is about the infrastructure. Okay, the charging stations, etc. Right. Although you mentioned that there are other opportunities if the car, industry doesn't, let's say, consume your product, I still believe that's the biggest, obviously, the potential consumer, right? So how do you think this, the infrastructure investment on that front will play a role in your potential target growth? And, did you factor that in your business case as a potential risk if, obviously if the demand doesn't come, they don't want to invest in that sort of infrastructure, and if the infrastructure doesn't come, then demand will not also increase. So there is a bit of a, sort of a cycle there.
Yeah.
So did you factor that? Did you think about that? And what's your reaction to
So that's the investment into energy production infrastructure, as in power plants, or?
No, I'm talking more about the charging stations, right?
Yes.
That's, from my perspective as a consumer, one of the reasons that I'm hesitating to basically at least check a potential, electric vehicle is that the lack of, infrastructure for me to charge the car.
You have range anxiety. That's what you have. You have range anxiety. Well, look, absolutely. So we can see the popularity within Japan and the US being for hybrid electric vehicles, right? Which we believe these batteries can be developed to assist with. They require a faster charge cycle, and then you have the PH EVs, which is plug-in hybrid vehicles, and they're the things that can be done in your home. So as Tesla will provide you a cord, maybe drawing from the battery that you've also purchased from them, which has taken the electricity from the sun. So in terms of rollouts, yes, that's been an issue. I think Israel is probably the best example for where that's happened. But this is almost coming back to the quality and cost issue. You can get the batteries that are having the quality that range anxiety is going, or if you can get the cost down to the point that you can be putting more of those batteries within your car, then that infrastructure requirement differs. But that's very, very politically driven. So within the US, California would be an example of where that can be. So linked, yes, but not if we're going to be going for the hybrid or just the EV.
So you see this as a potential risk, but your mitigation is the hybrid.
No, it's
potential lower cost, more batteries, and then the hybrid solution.
Yes. So the idea that you're going to be going to charging stations, the reason that people are going to be putting charging stations out is because enough people are going to be driving cars that need charging stations, and we're saying that with the advancement in technology, that you're going to get twofold. One, that'll probably come around where people believe that they're going to be able to use their electric vehicles and charge them, and two, the fact that they might be opting not to have the plug-in electric vehicles, which means that you're less reliant on that infrastructure being in place.